The holographic feed flickered to life across every communications relay in the Galactic Council chamber. What appeared wasn't a plea. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a countdown. This is Commander David Torres of the Terran Defense Coalition. You have 72 hours to withdraw all military assets from the Outer Reach colonies and release every human civilian in your detention facilities. This is your final warning. The council chamber erupted in laughter. 300 species, thousands of years of collective dominance, and they were being threatened by a species that had barely achieved faster-than-light travel 2 generations ago. But David Torres didn't blink. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stated, "When this timer reaches 0, we will consider all diplomatic solutions exhausted. The consequences will be yours to bear." The feed cut. 72 hours later, humanity stopped asking. If you're enjoying this story from Monster HFY, hit that like button and drop a comment telling us which moment hit hardest, because what comes next will redefine what it means to underestimate Earth. And make sure you subscribe, because this is just the beginning. Now, let's move forward into the trial that would shake the galaxy to its foundation. David Torres stood in the observation deck of the TDFS Resolute, watching the distant glimmer of the Valkyrie Empire's border stations. His reflection in the reinforced glass looked tired, 48 years old, decorated veteran of the colony wars. And now the man carrying humanity's last diplomatic message before the guns started talking. Behind him, the tactical display showed the disposition of forces. 17 human carriers positioned in a defensive shell around the Arcturus belt, protecting what remained of the civilian evacuation routes. Across the border, the Valkyrie had massed 400 warships, sleek biomechanical predators that had conquered 70 systems in the last decade alone. "Commander, we're receiving a response from the Valkyrie High Command," Lieutenant Sarah Chen announced from the comm station. "It's being broadcast on open channels." David turned. "Put it through." The holoprojector materialized the image of High Executor Malvith, his 6 eyes gleaming with what the translation algorithms interpreted as contempt. The Valkyrie were insected, their exoskeletons iridescent under the harsh lighting of their command ship. Malvith's mandibles clicked in what passed for their version of a smirk. "Commander Torres, we have received your demands. The Galactic Council finds them amusing." Malvith's head tilted, a gesture that looked predatory on his species. "Your colonies were established in violation of Sector Jurisdiction Treaty 447-B. Your civilians are being processed according to Council law. You have no legal standing, no military capacity to enforce threats, and no allies foolish enough to stand with you." David's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. "High Executor, we have provided documented evidence that Treaty 447-B was ratified without human representation. In direct violation of, the Council does not recognize your interpretation," Malvith interrupted. "You are a minor species throwing tantrums. We suggest you withdraw your fleet before we are forced to remind you of your place in the galactic hierarchy." "Then let me be clear," David said, stepping closer to the pickup. "We are offering one final opportunity for a peaceful resolution. 72 hours, withdraw from the colonies, release our civilians. We will submit this matter to neutral arbitration." "But if you refuse, you will do what, Commander?" Malvith's mandibles spread wide. "Your species has 15 inhabited systems. The Council represents 42,000. "Do the mathematics." "The mathematics," David replied quietly, "are exactly what I'm counting on you to miscalculate." The transmission ended. Lieutenant Chen looked up from her station, her face pale. "Sir, the deadline expires in 6 minutes." David nodded slowly, his eyes returning to the tactical display where those 400 Valkyrie warships waited in formation, proud, powerful, and utterly convinced of their superiority. "Time to see if they were paying attention," he murmured. Then across every human vessel in the fleet, the same order rippled through encrypted channels. "All units, Protocol Horizon. Execute," and in the depths of space, something humanity had been building in absolute silence for the last 3 years began to move. What the Valkyrie didn't know was that the human fleet they could see was never meant to fight them. It was meant to make them look the wrong way. The Valkyrie High Executor Malvith watched his tactical display with the satisfaction of a predator cornering wounded prey. The human fleet remained in its defensive position, exactly where his intelligence had predicted. Pitiful. All attack groups advance to engagement range, he ordered. Communications, broadcast this across all council channels. Let them watch what happens to species who forget their place. His fleet began its approach, a wall of 400 warships moving in perfect synchronization. They had done this 70 times before, the opening move of subjugation. Overwhelming force, broadcast humiliation, then the slow, grinding occupation that followed. But something was wrong. High Executor, his sensor officer's antennae quivered with confusion. The human vessels, they're not maneuvering to engage, they're turning away. Malvith's mandibles clicked with amusement. They're running, predictable, pursue and... Sir, we're detecting massive energy signatures, not from the human fleet, behind us. The tactical display updated. Then it exploded with red contact markers. 247 human warships had just materialized from quantum-dead zones, regions of space, so magnetically hostile that sensors couldn't penetrate them. Regions every sane species avoided because navigation was impossible. Apparently, humans had figured it out. The new fleet wasn't positioned randomly. They'd emerged in a perfect encirclement formation, their weapons already hot, their targeting solutions already locked. The Valkyrie fleet that had been hunting suddenly found itself in a kill box. All vessels, emergency evasion, Malvith shrieked. But his words were drowned out by the sound of his flagship's hull integrity alarms as the first human railgun salvo tore through his formation. Aboard the Resolute, David watched the engagement unfold with clinical precision. No satisfaction, no triumph, just the cold necessity of a man who'd spent 3 years planning for this exact moment. Tactical status? He asked. Chen's fingers flew across her console. Enemy formation is fragmenting. They're attempting to regroup at Rally Point Delta 7, but interceptor groups 3 and 5 are already there, David finished. Let them try. A new voice cut through the bridge chatter. Commander Tors, David turned to find Specialist Kira Venn standing at the secondary station. She wasn't human. She was Lethare, a species that had tried to warn the Council about humanity 6 months ago and been ignored. Her skin had a faint violet luminescence that intensified when she was stressed, and right now she was practically glowing. The Valkyrie are broadcasting a general distress call to all Council forces, Kira reported, her 3-fingered hands steady despite the tension radiating from her bioluminescent patterns. They're claiming this is an unprovoked attack. Make sure our recorder drones captured the timestamp, David replied. The attack began 4 minutes after our deadline expired. We gave them 72 hours and 16 minutes. Everything we're doing right now is legally documented self-defense under the very treaties they tried to use against us. Kira's large. Dark eyes studied him with an expression her species used to denote profound confusion. You planned for them to reject the warning. I planned for every possibility, David corrected gently. I hoped they'd choose the peaceful one. The tactical display updated again. The Valkyrie were attempting a fighting retreat toward the hyperspace jump corridor, the only escape route from this region of space. Commander, Chen said quietly, they're heading straight for the minefield. David's expression didn't change. I know. Sir, those are proximity-triggered antimatter mines. If they jump into that corridor, then they should have read the navigational warnings we broadcast on all standard channels 18 hours ago, David said. The ones clearly marked as civilian safety notices, filed properly with the Council's navigational authority, documenting temporary hazard zones in this sector. Kira's bioluminescence flickered. You warned them even about the trap. We warned them about everything, David replied. That's the point. The Valkyrie Vanguard hit the minefield at full burn. The detonations were visible even at this distance, white-hot flowers of annihilation blooming against the black. Dozens of ships vaporized instantly. The survivors scattered in panic, abandoning formation discipline, abandoning their wounded, abandoning everything except the primal urge to survive. Sir, Chen's voice was tight. We're being hailed. Multiple Valkyrie vessels are requesting terms of surrender. David was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried across the bridge with absolute clarity. Tell them we accept their surrender under the following conditions. All weapons systems disabled and vented to vacuum. All crew confined to quarters. All civilian prisoners released immediately to our medical transports. They will be treated in accordance with the Galactic Conventions on Warfare, the same conventions they claimed we didn't understand well enough to invoke. He paused. And tell them the Executor's flagship is not permitted to surrender. He had his chance for peace. Kira's eyes widened. Commander, the tactical display showed Malvith's massive command vessel trying desperately to maneuver away from the human formation closing around it like a fist. But there was nowhere left to run. And then, from the depths of the Valkyrie flagship, a new transmission began broadcasting, one that would change everything. The transmission wasn't coming from High Executor Malvith. It was coming from deep inside the Valkyrie flagship's detention level, broadcast on an emergency frequency that bypassed command protocols. The voice was human, female, hoarse from screaming, but still defiant. This is Dr. Rebecca Grant, Civilian Research Director from the Arcturus colony. There are 417 human civilians aboard this vessel being held in substandard detention. We are... The transmission cut off with the sound of energy weapons fire. David's hands gripped the edge of the tactical console hard enough that his knuckles went white. Every instinct screamed at him to order an immediate assault, to tear that ship apart bulkhead by bulkhead until every human civilian was safe. But that's exactly what Malvith was counting on. Commander, Kira said softly, her skin patterns shifting to a color that in her species indicated careful observation. The Executor is using your people as shields. I'm aware. David's voice was ice. Lieutenant Chen, get me a firing solution that disables their engines and power core without breaching the detention levels. Sir, their detention blocks are distributed throughout the ship. There's no clean shot that doesn't risk. Then we go in, David interrupted. Prep strike teams Alpha through Delta. Full breach kit, non-lethal priority for all sections that might contain civilians. Commander, that's suicide, Chen protested. Their internal defenses are designed to repel boarding actions at airlocks and docking collars, David finished. Which is why we're not using those. He pulled up a schematic of the Valkyrie flagship that human intelligence had been assembling for months. Weak points, ventilation systems. Sections where hull integrity was compromised by their own weapons' fire. We're going to punch through here, here, and here, David indicated 3 points on the ship's flanks. Breaching pods, shaped charges, and we're inside before they can seal bulkheads. Strike teams secure the civilians and hold position while you negotiate, Kira finished, understanding dawning in her expression. You're not trying to destroy the ship. You're trying to make him surrender it, David nodded. Malvith thinks he has leverage. We're going to show him he has a choice. Surrender the ship and face trial, or die when his own crew mutinies because we've taken everything he's using to keep them fighting. That's... Kira paused, searching for the right word. Ruthlessly compassionate. It's war, David replied quietly. You try to make the other side stop fighting without destroying everything, including yourself. The strike teams were already moving into position, 400 Marines across 20 breaching pods, armed with weapons designed to incapacitate rather than kill, because every dead Valkyrie was another family that would demand vengeance and another generation of conflict humanity couldn't afford. All teams, this is Tours, David broadcast on the tactical net. You have one objective, secure the civilians, everything else is secondary. If you encounter resistance, suppress it. If you encounter surrender, accept it. If you encounter non-combatants, protect them. We are the ones who warned them. We are the ones who offered peace. We will not become the monsters they accused us of being. Hoorah! The response echoed across 20 pods. Launch in 30 seconds, David ordered. Kira moved closer, her bioluminescence pulsing in a pattern that her species used to express deep concern. Commander, if the Executor detonates his own power core, then he murders 400 human civilians and his entire crew. And the Council will have to explain to 42,000 systems why they backed a war criminal, David said. He won't do it. He's a true believer in Valkyrie superiority. He thinks he can still win this. Can he? David watched the countdown timer tick towards 0, 20 seconds, 15. He could have, David said quietly. 72 hours ago, when all we wanted was to talk. 10 seconds, 5, the breaching pods launched. And aboard the Valkyrie flagship, in the detention block where 400 human civilians waited in darkness, someone heard the sound of shaped charges cutting through hull plating and began to hope. But in the command center, High Executor Malvith was making a call to someone the humans didn't know was listening. Someone with ships of their own. The first breach charge detonated like controlled thunder, peeling back the Valkyrie flagship's hull in a perfectly circular section 8 feet in diameter. Marine Lieutenant Jake Morrison was through the gap before the superheated metal stopped glowing, his weapon sweeping the corridor beyond. Empty. Team Alpha, we're in, he reported. Proceeding to Detention Block 7. Behind him, 40 Marines flowed through the breach with practiced efficiency. They moved through the Valkyrie ship like water finding cracks, fast, inevitable, unstoppable. They encountered the first resistance at Junction 42. Valkyrie security forces, mandibles spread in aggressive posture, energy weapons raised. For a moment, both sides faced each other across 20 feet of corridor. The Valkyrie had the numerical advantage. The humans had momentum. Morrison raised one hand, palm out. "We're here for the civilians," he said clearly, his translator broadcasting in perfect Valkyrie. "Stand down and you'll be treated as prisoners of war. Fight and you'll be treated as obstacles. Your choice. 5 seconds. The Valkyrie officer's antennae quivered. His weapon didn't lower. 4. 3. You cannot. 2. The Valkyrie's weapon clattered to the deck. His squad followed suit a heartbeat later, their exoskeletons sagging in a posture that signified submission. "Secure them," Morrison ordered. "Keep moving." They found the first group of civilians 3 corridors deeper. 17 humans, malnourished and terrified, crammed into a storage compartment that wasn't designed for life support. A young girl, maybe 7 years old, looked up at Morrison with eyes that had seen too much. "Are you real?" she whispered. Morrison knelt, keeping his weapon pointed safely away. "We're real, sweetheart. And we're getting you out of here." On the bridge of the Resolute, David monitored the strike team's progress with one eye while the other watched the larger tactical picture. Something was wrong. "Commander," Chen called out, "we're detecting new hyperspace signatures, multiple vectors, they're not Valkyrie." The tactical display populated with new contacts. 87 warships, but these weren't the biomechanical elegance of Valkyrie design. These were blocky, utilitarian, covered in weapon blisters. "IFF?" David asked, though he already knew the answer from the ship profiles. "Krethian Dominion," Kira confirmed, her bioluminescence flaring bright violet. "Commander, the Krethians are Council enforcers. If they're here..." Then Malvith called for backup before we even started shooting, David finished. "Time to intercept. 18 minutes. David's mind raced through the calculations. The strike teams needed at least 20 more minutes to secure all the civilian detention areas. If he withdrew now, those people died. If he stayed, he'd be fighting on 2 fronts against a combined force that outnumbered him nearly 2 to 1. "New contacts," Chen's voice cracked slightly. "Hyperspace signatures bearing 047, multiple capital ships. I'm reading. Oh my God." "Report," David ordered. "Sir, it's the Lethare fleet, all of it. 214 vessels, and they're moving to intercept the Krethian formation." Kira's hands flew to her mouth. Her bioluminescence cycling through colors that David's cultural database tagged as shock, pride, and fear. "My people, they came." A new transmission flooded the comm channels. The voice was aged but steady, speaking in the clicking, harmonic language of the Lethare before the translator kicked in. "This is Fleet Matriarch Sayara of the Lethare Confederacy. The Krethian Dominion is hereby notified that any hostile action against human forces will be considered an act of war against the Lethare people. We stand with humanity. We stand with those who warn before they strike. We stand with those who remember that justice without mercy is simply tyranny wearing a different name." The Krethian fleet slowed, clearly unprepared for this development. David opened a channel. "Matriarch Sayara, this is Commander Tors. We appreciate." "Save your gratitude, Commander," Sayara's voice cut through. 6 months ago, my people tried to warn the Council about you." Not because we feared your violence, but because we recognized your restraint. A species that plans for peace while preparing for war is one the galaxy cannot afford to antagonize. Today, we prove we meant it. But even as the Lethare fleet moved into formation, David's console lit up with a priority alert from the Valkyrie flagship. High Executor Malvith was broadcasting again. And this time, he was showing the galaxy something that would turn humanity from aggressors into something far more dangerous. Into witnesses. The broadcast was raw, unedited footage from the Valkyrie detention facilities. Not just the ones aboard Malvith's flagship, all of them, across 17 systems. The galaxy watched in real time as the feeds showed human civilians, families, children. Elderly being systematically processed through what the Valkyrie had clinically labeled resource extraction protocols, forced labor in toxic environments, medical experimentation without consent, children separated from parents and classified as educational assets to be distributed to Valkyrie creches. But worse than any of that was the casualty list scrolling beside the footage. 4,732 confirmed human deaths, in facilities the Council had authorized. Under procedures the Council had approved. According to treaties the Council had ratified without human input. David stared at the data streaming across his console, feeling something cold and terrible settle in his chest. They'd known the civilians were being mistreated. They'd suspected it was bad. They hadn't known it was genocide. "Why is he showing us this?" Chen whispered. Kira's bioluminescence had gone completely dark, a Lethare stress response equivalent to shock. "He's trying to justify it. Look at the Council channels." She was right. Malvith's transmission included his own commentary, broadcast across every Council frequency. These images prove the necessity of our actions. The human species displays dangerous emotional volatility, requiring firm management and cultural correction. The Council's protocols were designed to prevent exactly the kind of military aggression they are now demonstrating. David cut the feed. His hands were steady as he opened a channel to all human forces, all Lethare ships, and, critically, every single Council observer vessel that was recording this engagement. "This is Commander David Torres of the Terran Defense Coalition," he said, his voice carrying the weight of every human who died in those facilities. 72 hours ago, we delivered a warning. We showed you the legal framework, we showed you the evidence, we gave you time to choose peace." He paused, letting the silence emphasize what came next. "You chose this, every ship we've destroyed. Every Valkyrie soldier who died fighting instead of surrendering. Every moment of terror those civilians endured while we fought our way through that flagship. You chose. This," he pulled up the recorded transmission from 3 days ago, his own face, calm and professional, delivering the terms. "We told you what would happen, we documented it, we filed it properly. We gave you every opportunity to avoid this outcome, and when you laughed at us, when you called us a minor species, when you told us to accept our place," David's eyes hardened. "You forgot to ask yourselves one simple question. What kind of species becomes spacefaring in under 2 centuries? What kind of species builds a fleet in absolute silence while negotiating for peace? What kind of species plans this carefully, this thoroughly, and still offers mercy first?" He leaned forward. "The kind you should have listened to." Across the fleet, new orders rippled through encrypted channels. Every human ship began moving with renewed purpose, not retreating, not even pausing, but executing the next phase of a plan that had been set in motion the moment Malvith rejected the warning. "Strike team's status?" David asked. "All civilians secured," Morrison reported. "We have control of detention blocks 1 through 17. We've also secured the Valkyrie medical bay and found," his voice faltered. "Sir, we found their research data, everything they were doing to our people, it's all here. Copy that. Hold position and prepare for extraction." David turned to Kira. "I need you to do something for me." Her bioluminescence flickered with uncertainty. "Commander, contact your matriarch. Tell her we're about to offer surrender terms to the entire Valkyrie fleet. Terms that include full cooperation with a war crimes tribunal overseen by neutral parties with all evidence made public." "The Council will never allow—" "The Council," David interrupted gently. is going to be too busy explaining to 42,000 systems why they authorized genocide against a species whose only crime was colonizing unclaimed space. He looked back at the tactical display, where the Valkyrie fleet was fragmenting, where the Krethian reinforcements were holding position, where the Lethari were broadcasting the entire engagement to every corner of known space. War is easy, David said quietly. Peace is what requires strength. But before anyone could respond, the Resolute's sensors detected something that changed everything. A hyperspace signature unlike anything in the human database. Something old was waking up, and it had been watching. The ship that emerged from hyperspace was ancient beyond measure, its hull covered in symbols that predated the Galactic Council by millennia. The architects, the species that had built the first jump gates, the first translation protocols, the very framework of galactic civilization. They hadn't been seen in 700 years, until now. The transmission was brief, formal, and addressed to every species in range. We are the architects. We established the Council to prevent exactly this, the strong preying on the weak under the pretense of law. We have reviewed the evidence. We have heard the warning humanity provided. We have witnessed the response. A pause that seemed to echo across light years. The Galactic Council is hereby dissolved pending investigation into systematic legal abuse and authorized genocide. The Terran Defense Coalition is recognized as a sovereign power with full diplomatic standing. All species involved in the detention and processing of human civilians will surrender complete records and submit to tribunal jurisdiction. David stood in the observation deck of the Resolute, watching the Valkyrie fleet surrender proceed with military precision. Medical transports were already ferrying the freed civilians to human carriers. The Lethari were providing security escort. Even some Krethian vessels had broken formation to offer humanitarian assistance, a tacit acknowledgement that they'd been on the wrong side. Kira stood beside him, her bioluminescence cycling through colors he'd learned to recognize as thoughtful reflection. "You knew," she said finally, "when you gave that warning. You knew they'd refuse." "I hoped they wouldn't," David replied honestly. "But I prepared for what happens when people in power forget that power has limits." "What happens now?" "Now," David considered the question, "now we rebuild. We establish new treaties, better ones, with species who understand that minor is a temporary condition. We make sure the Council, whatever replaces it, includes voices from everyone, not just the oldest and strongest. And if someone forgets again. If another Malvith rises," David smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Then they'll remember this moment. They'll remember that humanity warned them first, that we gave them every opportunity. That we fought with honor even when our people were dying." He turned to face her directly. "And they'll remember that we won anyway." 3 months later, the tribunal convened on neutral ground. The evidence was damning, comprehensive, and made public across every system. High Executor Malvith was sentenced to life imprisonment. 16 other Valkyrie officials joined him. The Council was restructured with 23 new species added to its membership, including humanity. And in the archives preserved for history was a simple recording. Commander David Torres, standing alone, delivering a warning the galaxy chose to ignore. Because humanity had learned something the old powers had forgotten. True strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how clearly you can warn someone before you have to. Thank you for journeying with us through this story here on Monster HFY. If this tale of humanity's restraint and resolve moved you, show some love by dropping a comment below. We read every single one. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that the strongest warnings come from those who least want to use force. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now, because we've got more stories where humanity shows the galaxy what it really means to be civilized.